I'm reluctant to start my talk by bragging, but when it comes to citizens' assemblies, of all your speakers this weekend, there is no one with less experience than me. However, I am happy to share with you, at Marjan's request, my one and only experience with a citizens' assembly. Fortunately, I have members of my team who have real experience with citizens' assembly who helped me avoid a whole bunch of problems, and who learned from the people that I feel very honored to have met over this last week. So I will say that I hope this will be thought-provoking, because from a process standpoint, we started off asking a different question, kind of running a different kind of experiment. What we were wondering about is, what if you wanted to run a citizens' assembly and you were running it not with tens of people, hundreds of people, 1,000 people, but what if you wanted to run a citizens' assembly with tens of thousands of people? What if you wanted to do that? As Nick mentioned, I have a background in technology, scaling businesses through technology, and so it's like, how could that experience be applied to citizens' assemblies, and why? Like, why would you do that? We're a little polarized here in the United States. You may have noticed, read the newspapers. So could we get many, many, many more people participating in public problem solving? And might that help us start a movement towards an overall idea of like, hey, there might be a different way we could govern ourselves, and it's through deliberation rather than through politics. That being said, Ian said something that made me sort of even question that assumption, which is, it's not the number of people in the room, it's whether you see people like you. So it's sort of like, it's led to some questioning from our team. That being said, this was the premise of the work that we did in Montrose, and so it led to a whole bunch of variations on how a citizens' assembly is held, which I think I mostly learned this weekend of the differences. So there's a few things. So I'm going to go through it, but let me first let me set the stage. On the western slopes of the Rocky Mountains, there is a small county called Montrose, Colorado. And Montrose, nope. Yeah, Montrose is conservative. About 67% voted for Trump in 2020. And that, but it is also diverse. That other percentage, very, very diverse. It's a city that sits inside of a county, and that city is becoming sort of more and more urbane. So because of a completely random encounter in a buffet line at a conference, we had the opportunity to do our pilot citizens assembly in Montrose, and we were very lucky that we got that. The first thing we did is talk to local leaders across the board in business, health, education, it's like all across the board. And after the series of conversations, they decided that we should focus on the area of childcare. That is to say, the shortage of childcare and the shortage of affordable childcare. They selected that. And then we did something that is different than what Ewan was talking about yesterday with remits. We created something called a shared goal, And we did that with these community leaders. They ended up doing a lot of the wordsmithing. We were also talking with community, just regular folks in the community, and they ended up coming up with, this is a shared goal. Every parent and guardian in Montrose shall have access to dependable, safe, affordable, and enriching childcare options so they can work, attend school, or otherwise contribute to our community. And so the idea behind the shared goal is, especially in a place that's quite polarized, and Montrose is pretty polarized, if we have the same goal, we don't need to demonize each other. We want the same end result. Now we're just talking about how to get there. So that was the idea. Okay. So then we started recruiting. It's worth noting that we had a really tight time box for this. Sarah Drury and I, showed up in Montrose. We'd done the kind of pre-work. Sarah and I showed up in Montrose at the beginning of May. I drove my van from Chicago. We got an Airbnb and we set up shop. Our first morning we went to a Rotary Club meeting. And 1 week later, I was being inducted into Rotary. Like, jump in. And we wanted to finish this entire deliberation before Thanksgiving. So we had a lot, and that time box drove a lot of our decision making. So we did the standard stuff. We sent out a mailer to the whole county, but we also did 35 pop-up events, showing up at farmers markets, at coffee shops, etc. We went door to door. We did PR. We did all kinds of stuff. Okay, downside, very expensive. Like, that was a lot of flying Unify staff into town and putting them up. Upside, we very, very quickly raised awareness of both the deliberation and of the childcare problem, which of course is very well known by parents, but not necessarily the rest of the community. So we got 222 people to raise their hands and say, I'd like to participate in this deliberation thing that you're talking about. And then we did a lottery, like the standard lottery, except we're like, all right, well, if this is going to be for someday thousands of people, maybe we should make it look like an exciting television show. So we had like the high school band, and we had just like the Indians and their palm leaves, we had children selecting balls out of bowls and rolling the dice. And it was a lot of fun. It was a multi-camera shoot, and I think that actually went quite well and created a lot, like a kind of a really positive spirit. Like, because doing democracy should be fun, right? That's right. Thank you. Thank you very much. So then we've got our assembly, and you see here, like, you see them all together. But the reality is, because of course we're testing, like, how might this work at a small scale, but how might it work if we were to go to large scale? So the entire assembly, except for one session, was online. There were 12 total sessions, and it was 2 hours a week for each session. So this is the one time that it was that we were all together. Demographics, we wanted to make sure that we included political party registration, because we knew that was going to be an issue. People really want to know. Now you'll notice that unaffiliated in Montrose is the largest kind of political registration, which is a trend in Colorado, but you get a sense of it. We got within 4% of these numbers. Like, we got really, really close. And then the other demographics, like, in order to just make sure that we had like meaningful diversity of perspective. Another one that's not on here are parents. And interestingly, we slightly over-indexed for parents because we wanted to make sure that when we broke it into small groups, that there were at least 2 parents in each small group, so that it was like one parent wasn't alone to represent like what it's like to be a parent. During our orientation, this is like our one kind of in-person session. We had 3 of the sessions were dedicated to orientation. We did a couple of things that I think are worth considering for your citizens' assembly. We wanted to make sure that people had a sense of belonging, because the whole time they're going to be online with each other. Like, they didn't have the benefit of like breaking bread, right? Like sitting at the table, like they didn't have that. And it was like 2 hours a week instead of like a whole day that they might spend together. So it's like really important that they connect quickly. So we did something called speed meeting. It's sort of a variation on speed dating, but not dating, just meeting. So the people who would be in a small group together, and generally we did some mixing up, but people mostly actually stayed in their small groups where they actually knew and trusted each other. And those groups were very, very like deliberately mixed up to be diverse. So like, you two guys would be talking to each other. You'd have an icebreaker question like, tell me about a favorite childhood memory. And you both do that for 6 minutes, and then you'd switch and you'd each have another partner. So you ended up talking to every single person in your small group individually very quickly. And the reason that we know that works is because we have another program at Unify America where we pair college students together. They fill out a form, you know, how they vote, their demographic information. They come together and we pair them across difference. Like, so they're like, I'm gonna be talking to somebody who probably votes differently than me, like different walk of life than me. We do this icebreaker question. They then talk about a series of consequential issues, abortion, immigration, speech on campus, et cetera. And it's like, they all start into this like very, very nervous. And by the end, they're like exchanging social media, you know, information with each other, you know, so they can stay in touch. So we know this works, and it's worth noting, before we do that, it's called the Unify Challenge. We do a poll, and we ask, do you have hope for the future of democracy? What percentage of college students do you think have hope for the future of democracy? 35, 40, 27, 80, 16, 16% before they do this. 1 hour later, talking with somebody who's really different from them and talking about consequential issues and getting to know them, it jumps to 63%. That's in an hour. And we just finished a study 4 to 6 weeks out from their experience. That effect lasts. Like, that one experience was talking to somebody who's different from them really, really has an impact. Also, 55% of the students that we have gone through the program say that they are more likely to vote. And we've scaled that program from, in 2021 was our first year, we had 200 students. This year we'll do 12,000 students across the country from 150 universities. Anyway, we knew that this like pairing, the idea of pairing people together in one-on-one conversations, just how powerful that is. And so it's something just to think about as you do, like it's an incredibly quick way for people to gain trust with each other. Two other things that we did during orientation that are also worth considering. We taught about cognitive biases. We talked about, we taught them in this kind of sort of a funny video on confirmation bias, on experience bias, like, oh, my experience applies to everyone. Not so much, it actually doesn't. So, and the feedback on this training from delegates was off the charts. I mean, it was absolutely like mind expanding for them to understand the biases that they walk around with, and then they recognize that, oh God, that's right, I do that. If we could teach every American that they like what confirmation bias is, I think that's like enough to change the world. So anyway, please consider thinking about that. And then we also taught them about collective wisdom, the idea like, hey, if we're all listening to each other, you don't have to win any debates here. You all have a vote. Your job is to make your vote as smart as possible and help your fellow delegates make their vote as smart as possible by sharing your perspective. That will create collective wisdom. And the delegates were all using the term collective wisdom by midway through the process, which we thought was a real big win. The small groups, we called them trusts. They're like, oh, I'm in trust 3, I'm in trust 4. And it's like just a name to kind of reinforce the idea. We have a 98-page report we spend a lot of time on. If you want to learn about, like, we have many, many other like weird innovations. We used video to do a lot of the information, and that like 74% of the delegates were like, they preferred using video. We also had all the text, but they preferred using video in order to make sure that all the, that any delegate's question was understood by all the other delegates. Again, thinking about this at scale, we had this really, really well-organized FAQ. Also, of people outside, you know, we had some pretty skeptical op-eds from this very conservative community, and we turned their maybe things that weren't even questions, but were just sort of accusations. We turned those into questions, and then that was available to the public. So there were other things that we did along the way. We got really excellent responses. The kind of like results that you'd expect in any citizens assembly. And then here is the Democratic mayor of Montrose and the Republican county commissioner at our final event in February, where they got up to sort of celebrate the work of their fellow citizens. So now, there was a group of folks who helped us put that shared goal together. Those are all the leaders in childcare and youth services. They are now implementing the recommendations from this assembly. The threshold was 66%. because of a few loud voices, I was pretty sure we were going to get 0. But it turned out that 3 of the ideas received more than 70% of support of this like very mixed assembly, and 2 of them got more than 80% support. And those are now being implemented. And then the icing on the cake is a bunch of delegates and other community members who we engaged in sort of an outside of the deliberation process decided we want to keep doing this. And they formed their own 501c3, their own nonprofit called Unify Montrose, to do ongoing public problem solving in Montrose. And so what that led us to is like, oh, we seem to have just built capacity by accident. Maybe we should be doing that on purpose. And so like our question really now is, how do we build ongoing citizens assemblies in small towns everywhere so more and more people can have the experience of doing public problem solving? So thank you.